In this lesson, we'll talk about the process of using selection masks inside of Maya. Okay, so we're going to open up the scene file for lesson 12 to follow along. And you can see I have this scene file set up with a few things in here. So we have some particles moving around, we have a little bit of animation, a couple of different surface types, and what this will do is give us a good opportunity to see the benefit of a feature called selection masks inside of Maya. Now, selection masks can become really useful, especially when we have lots of objects in our scene, and if we have certain objects that may be getting in the way of selecting certain other things in our scene. So, perfect example of this is I have all of these different particles in this scene. Now, at the moment, a lot of these particles are sort of getting in the way of selecting anything else. You can see most of these objects, when I try to select, a lot of times you can see it's just selecting whatever is the most prominent element, or whatever element is in front, which in most instances, in my case, for this scene, is going to be the particle. So sometimes you can see I can sort of get lucky and maybe grab one of these little NURBS rings back here, but for the most part, this set of particles is really getting in my way. So rather than going in and trying to disable particles and turning their visibility on and off, what we can do is take advantage of these selection masks, which these will basically enable or disable as a whole the selectability of certain elements in our scene. So for example, if these particles are getting in the way of selecting certain objects in my scene, but I still want these particles to be present in my scene, we can go up to our selection masks and we can choose to disable the dynamics, which particles fall under the category of dynamics. So now this is no longer enabled as part of my selection process. So now you'll notice I can no longer even select these particles. And that now means that I can select right through these and no longer have to worry about these getting in the way of selecting certain pieces of geometry. Okay, likewise, I could basically flip this around. So if I wanted to have my particles enabled, but completely disable the possibility of accidentally selecting any geometry in my scene, I can go over to my selection mask and disable geometry. So now I can sit here and click and drag and select my particles all day long, but now there's no possibility of me selecting any of my geometry. So these features are really nice for working with larger, more complex scenes where you have lots of different elements, lots of different overlapping pieces, and starting to work with some of those different pieces can start to become a real hassle. Now, within these selection masks, we can actually get a little bit more detailed. So, for example, if we have maybe a combination of NURBS geometry and polygon geometry in our scene, and maybe we only want to disable the selection of certain NURBS objects. Well, what we can do is right-click on one of these selection masks, and a lot of times these have more options hidden underneath. So let's say instead of just completely enabling or disabling the selection of all geometry in my scene, I can just right-click and maybe choose to only disable the selection of NURBS surfaces. So click on that, and now you can see that this little selection mask button turns from sort of a gray to almost sort of a copperish color. Now what this is doing is indicating that there is only a partial enabling of this feature. So I have certain options in here that are enabled and certain options that are disabled. That's what this sort of a copper color means. So now I can no longer select any polygon, or rather any NURBS objects in my scenes, but if I have, let's say, polygon objects in here, I can still select those. And again, if I find that my particles are getting in the way of this, I can disable the selection of my particles, and now I can come in and select any polygon objects without having to worry about accidentally selecting anything else. Now, as I mentioned in the previous lesson, we have within our hotbox, if we press and hold the space bar, we have the ability to enable and disable certain selection masks from this zone over here. And sometimes these will sort of do almost sort of a macro of enabling or disabling certain features. So, for example, if we were to come in and, let's say, disable dynamics, you can see what this will try to do is enable selection of pretty much anything that is not related to dynamics. So now I can only select dynamic objects in the scene, which in this case is going to be particles. And to toggle that back on, just go back to your zone and turn that dynamics mask back on again. Alright, and in this case that may not always work, so what you may sometimes have to do is right click and just simply go back to object mode. There we go, that'll get us back to where we were previously. Okay, so the selection masks, as I said, are really nice, and as you start to work with more complex scenes, will become extremely useful in the selection process and working with the various objects in your scene. So that's a look at how we can take advantage of these selection masks inside of Maya.